There's a specific kind of silence that falls over a battlefield when soldiers stop believing anyone is coming for them. It is not quiet. Guns still fire. People still scream. The ground still shakes from things too large and too alien to have names yet. But underneath all of it, underneath the noise and the smoke and the blood, there's a silence that lives in the chest. In the part of a person that used to hold hope before the math got too clear and the hours got too long. The Keth had calculated it perfectly. That was the thing about them. They did not make mistakes. They did not overextend. They did not attack a target until they had already won the war on a spreadsheet, in a war room, in a language made entirely of probability and patience. They looked at a planet. They looked at its defenders. They ran the numbers. And then they moved. They had been doing this for 200 years before humanity even knew they existed. 14 civilizations. 14 planets. 14 sets of survivors who all said the same thing afterward in 14 different languages with 14 different words for the same feeling. We waited. And no one came. The Valorians were going to be number 15. They knew it. Command knew it. The soldiers in the trenches knew it. The children in the underground shelters, who had stopped asking when the adults were coming to get them, knew it in the way children know things. Not in words, not in numbers, but in the quality of the silence in the room when grown-ups think no one is listening. Earth's expeditionary fleet was 3 weeks away, on a good day, with clear lanes and no ambushes and engines that did not need to breathe. The Keth would finish Valor 4 in 9 days. Everyone had done the math. Everyone had accepted the answer. Nobody had told the humans. That is the thing that 14 civilizations never understood about Earth's warriors. The math was never the point. The math was just a number, and numbers had never once in human history convinced a human being to stop. They were already in the air. They had been in the air for 6 days before anyone authorized it. This is their story. The city of Valor Prime had been burning for 11 days. Not the kind of burning that puts itself out. The kind that finds new things to eat every hour, that learns the layout of streets and alleys the way a patient predator learns a forest, that turns corners and backtracks and waits. The Keth did not use fire as a weapon. They used it as a signal. Fire meant a sector had been processed. Fire meant move on. Fire meant the math in this square kilometer had already been completed, and the answer had been written in ash. Commander Syra Vell stood on the roof of what used to be the Regional Defense Ministry and looked at the fire moving toward them from the east. She did not look at it long. Looking at it too long did something to the back of the throat. A tightening. A kind of pre-grief that tasted like swallowed metal. She had learned in the first week to look at things only as long as you needed to, and then look at something else. Something close. Something you could touch. She looked at her hands instead. The left one was wrapped in a field bandage that had gone from white to a color with no name in the first 48 hours, and it stayed there. The right one was clean, because the right one held the comms unit, and she needed it to work, and blood and circuitry had a relationship problem she did not have the time or the parts to resolve. Sector 12 is gone, said Lieutenant Darrow from behind her. He said it the way he said everything now. Flat. Precise. Like he was reading from a report about someone else's planet. She had watched him learn to talk that way over the course of a week, the same way she had watched everyone learn to do it. The ones who couldn't learn it didn't last long. Not because they died faster, just because the ones who kept feeling everything out loud made it harder for everyone else to keep feeling nothing. Sector 12, she said, and wrote it on the board. The board was a piece of structural paneling she had pulled from a collapsed wall on day 4. Across it, in marker that kept running out and getting replaced with whatever she could find, paint, blood once, charcoal from the fires, was a grid of Valor Prime. Every sector they had held. Every sector they had lost. The sectors they had lost were crossed out. She'd used a different color at first, trying to make the board readable, trying to make it look like a situation that had colors in it. She'd stopped that by day 6. Now everything was the same color. Everything was crossed out, except for the center. The center of the city, a 4-sector cluster built around the old Parliament building, was still theirs. Barely. But there's... How many in the shelters? She asked. Darrow did not check his datapad. He had memorized it days ago. Civilian, 41,200 and change. Wounded soldiers who can't fight, 612. Children under 12, 9,800. She wrote nothing. There was no column on the board for people who were still alive. The board was only for places. And fighters? 841 confirmed operational. Maybe 60 more who say they're operational and are lying about it. She almost smiled. Almost. Count them. If they say they can fight, they can fight. Yes, Commander. She looked back at the fire. 9,800 children. She let the number sit in her chest for exactly 3 seconds, the way she allowed herself to do sometimes. 3 seconds was the limit she'd set herself. After 3 seconds, the number stopped being children and started being a variable, and variables are things you could work with. 3 seconds passed. She picked up the comms unit. The coalition command frequency had been mostly quiet for 2 days. That was new. In the first week, it had been loud. Other commanders, other planets, the Galactic Compact representative with his careful diplomatic phrasing that managed to say nothing for extended periods with remarkable efficiency. There had been promises. There had been assessments. There had been the word consideration used so many times that it started to sound like a door being closed very slowly. Then, the transmissions thinned. Then, the representative stopped calling personally and sent a deputy. Then, the deputies started being unavailable. Then, 2 days ago, the frequency went quiet in the particular way that meant the people on the other end were still there, still listening, but had run out of things to say that weren't the truth. The truth, as Bessira had been able to reconstruct it from the silences and the half-sentences and the way the compact representative deputy breathed before he said anything, was this. The Keth had positioned interdiction ships at every viable jump point within range of Valor 4. Nothing that wasn't already in the system could get in without fighting through a blockade that had been specifically designed to destroy whatever tried. The nearest compact military force capable of breaking that blockade was 3 weeks away. The Keth would complete their ground operation in somewhere between 7 and 10 days. The math was not complicated. She pressed the transmit button anyway. Coalition Command, this is Commander Vel, Valor Prime Defense. We are holding the parliamentary district. 41,000 civilian lives, plus military personnel. We require extraction or reinforcement. Over. She waited. The frequency hummed. A voice came back. It was the deputy. He sounded like someone who had been rehearsing something difficult. Commander Vel, Coalition Command acknowledges your transmission. We want you to know that every option is being, I need a yes or a no, she said. The humming. Commander, the situation at the jump points, yes or no. Is anyone coming? The deputy breathed. That specific breath. The one before the truth. Commander, we do not currently have assets positioned to. She turned off the comms. She told her people at 0800 the next morning. She did not dress it up. She did not use the word consideration. She stood in front of 894 soldiers. The liars have been counted as ordered, in a room that used to be the Parliament's main chamber and was now a triage center and weapons depot and kitchen and command post all at once. And she told them that no one was coming. She told them they were going to fight anyway. She told them they were going to hold the parliamentary district until there was no district left to hold. And they were going to do it because 41,000 people were underground depending on them, and because there was nothing else to do that was worth doing. She told them they could be angry. She told them she was angry. I'm not going to tell you this is fair, she said. I'm not going to tell you that history will remember you. History might not remember anything about this planet at all. The Keth are very thorough. She paused. Let that sit. But those people underground know we're up here. The children down there know someone is standing between them and the fire. That's not nothing. That's actually the whole thing. No one cheered. She hadn't expected them to. What they did instead was go back to their posts. That was enough. 430 light years away, in a converted cargo hauler moving at a speed that its manufacturer had specifically stated in the warranty documents it should never attempt, Colonel Marcus Webb was eating a protein bar that tasted like a warehouse and watching a holographic display of the Valor system with the focused intensity of a man solving a puzzle that had already told him it was unsolvable. He had 13 ships. Technically 12 because one of them, the persistent argument, which had been named by its crew with a kind of self-aware humor that Webb had come to deeply respect, had an engine coupling issue that the chief engineer described as not catastrophic yet, emphasis on yet. 12 ships and 2,300 soldiers and a blockade designed by a species that had been winning wars for 2 centuries. He had been given the coordinates by a compact intelligence officer who had then immediately said, in the practice tone of someone distributing plausible deniability, that this was reconnaissance only, that no official sanction existed for a military incursion, that Compact Command had not authorized any action and would be unable to support any action that might occur unofficially. Webb had said, understood, which was true. He understood everything the officer had said. He had then gone and done it anyway, which was the part he had left out of his response. 6 days in transit. He'd spent the first 2 running numbers. The Keth blockade of the primary jump point had 12 interdiction ships, heavy class, specifically configured to destroy anything emerging from jump with precision fire in the first 4 seconds. The window when a ship coming out of faster-than-light travel was still reorienting, still blind, still fragile. For seconds was not enough time to fight back. For seconds was, however, enough time to do something else. He'd spent days 3 through 6 working on what that something else was. He found it, the way he always found things, not by being smarter than the problem, but by being willing to sit with the problem until it got bored and showed him a door. He was not a genius. He would have told you that himself. He was just a man who was constitutionally incapable of believing that a situation had no options, even when the situation had been very clear about its optionlessness. The Keth blockade was configured for jump point emergence. Ships coming out of jump at a standard deceleration curve, at a standard trajectory, in a standard formation. Nobody had ever not done that. Jump point emergence had a physics to it, a shape. You came out fast and hot and disoriented, and you decelerated into combat range, and the interdiction ships destroyed you with 4 seconds of precision fire while you were still finding your eyes. What nobody had ever done, because it was violent and stupid and put enormous stress on hulls that engineers specifically warned against, was jump into the system at a trajectory that put you past the blockade on emergence. Not through it, past it, coming out of jump, not at the jump point, but at the coordinates on the other side, having used the jump point's gravitational geometry as a slingshot rather than a door. Emerging not at the front of the engagement zone, but in the middle of it, inside the minimum engagement range of the interdiction ships, in the 4 seconds when the Keth were looking the other way. The chief engineer of the persistent argument had looked at his calculations for a long time before saying anything. This will absolutely destroy 3 of the ships, she said finally. Which 3? Depends on their hull tolerance. Could be any of them. Could it be none of them? She looked at him the way people look at questions that are technically not impossible. If the pilots are very good and very lucky. They're very good, he said. He did not say anything about luck. Luck was a variable. You didn't plan for variables. You planned for everything else, and let the variables sort themselves out. He finished the protein bar. He looked at the display. 9 days until the Keth finished on the ground. 6 days of travel time elapsed. 3 days left. The math said they were going to be too late. He turned off the display. He went to sleep. In the morning, he would be 1 day closer, and the math would still be wrong, and he would keep going anyway. That was, in his experience, how everything eventually got done. Back in Valor Prime, Syra Vell did not sleep. She sat at the board and looked at the crossed-out sectors and thought about the children underground who had stopped asking when someone was coming. She thought about all the things she had not said to her soldiers that morning, because some things you said out loud become less true just from the saying. She thought about the fact that she was angry and that the anger was useful and that she was going to use every last piece of it. Outside, the fire moved west. She picked up her weapon. She went to the eastern wall. She took her position, and she waited not for rescue. Rescue was a closed door with a very polite deputy standing in front of it, but for dawn, because dawn meant another day, and another day meant 41,000 people were still underground, still alive, still hers to protect for a few more hours. That was the calculation she was running now. Hours, not weeks, not rescue windows, just hours, one at a time, earned the hard way with everything she had. The fire lit the sky orange to the east. She had seen worse colors. She steadied her grip. She waited for them to come. The Keth did not waste time. That was the thing soldiers who had fought them said afterward in debriefs and memoirs and the kind of quiet conversations that happened in bars after enough time had passed that it was survivable to talk about. They said, the Keth do not waste time. Not because they are cruel. Cruelty implies an emotional relationship with the target. The Keth had no emotional relationship with anything they destroyed. They destroyed efficiently as a function, the way a machine destroys a nut and bolt with a wrench. Not because it hates the bolt, but because the bolt is in the way of a thing that needs doing. The Keth ground commander, if the being coordinating the assault on Valor Prime could be called that, if the biological entity at the center of a network of tactical AI and mechanized assault vehicles and something between a soldier and a logistics algorithm could be described by a word as human as commander, had assessed the parliamentary district on day 9 and made an adjustment. The adjustment was this: They did not need to breach it. Breaching cost time and units. The parliamentary district's defenders were, by the ground commander's calculations, operating at less than 12% combat efficiency. Their ammunition was degrading. Their fortifications were not being meaningfully replenished. In 72 hours, they would cross a threshold of operational incapacity below which they could not meaningfully contest a ground advance. So the Keth ground commander did not order a ground advance. It ordered a perimeter hold and waited. The math said 72 hours. Syra learned about the perimeter hold from the silence. 2 days of escalating contact, breaching attempts, feint to the southern barricade, one serious push at the river gate that had cost her 60 fighters and cost the Keth almost nothing because the Keth factored losses into their equations in advance and were never surprised by them. 2 days of that, and then at 0300 on what she was now calling day 12, because nobody had managed to change the calendar since the war started, the contact stopped. Not stopped like a pause. Stopped like a held breath. She sent scouts. 3 teams. 2 came back. What they reported was this. The Keth had withdrawn to a perimeter roughly 800 meters from the district's edge. They had positioned units at every egress point. They were not advancing. They were not retreating. They were waiting. She sat with that for a long time. They know we're low on ammunition, said Darrow. It was not a question. They have our resupply records, she said. They've been inside the coalition network since day 4. They know exactly how much we have and exactly how fast we're using it. She paused. They've done this before. With Fest Santu, he said, and Cora Prime, and the Ven homeworld. She had read every account of every Keth planetary operation she could find in the first week, looking for something the Keth had done wrong. She had not found it. What she had found was a pattern. The same pattern 14 times. A slow reduction. An isolation. And then, at the point where the math crossed a threshold, a final engagement that was less battle and more process. They're not going to come at us again until we can't fight back. They've decided the cost of a direct assault isn't worth it when waiting accomplishes the same thing. So what do we do? She looked at the board. At the center sectors, still unmarked. Still theirs. We make the wait cost them something, she said. She redesigned the entire defense in 26 hours. She pulled fighters from the walls. Half of them, the half who were steadiest, who could move quiet, and sent them out. Not to attack. To be strange. To be unpredictable in the specific way that organizations built on perfect calculation cannot account for. Because perfect calculation requires that your opponent be, at some level, rational. She sent them out to cut power lines and reroute them. To move debris in patterns that had no tactical logic, but that created new cover and new sight lines where the Keth models said there should be neither. To paint markings on the roads that looked like tactical indicators, but led nowhere. To make noise in places where silence was expected, and be silent in places where the Keth sensors were listening for activity. She sent Lieutenant Darrow to the shelters with a very specific assignment. He came back 6 hours later with 83 civilians who had manufacturing experience. She put them to work. They did not make weapons. They had no materials for weapons. They made things that looked like weapons from certain angles and from certain sensor frequencies. They made decoys, structural frames that, to a Keth drone conducting a passive scan of the district, registered as artillery emplacements. Bundles of conductive material wrapped in ways that mimicked the thermal signature of powered armor. They put them everywhere. In visible positions. In positions that said, "We are preparing for a siege we plan to outlast." It was not real. But the Keth ground commander did not know that. For 48 hours, the perimeter held without advancing. Every hour the Keth waited was an hour the children underground were still alive. Every hour was the only victory available, and she took them, one at a time, and did not let herself think about the 68th hour or the 72nd hour or what came after the math finished running. She thought about the next hour. Just the next one. Colonel Marcus Webb entered the Veiler system sideways. That was not the technical description. The technical description, as written by the chief engineer of the persistent argument in a report she filed afterward because she felt the record needed correcting, was Colonel Webb executed a non-standard transluminal emergence, utilizing jump-point gravitational gradient slingshot geometry to achieve system entry at coordinates interior to the Keth interdiction formation's established engagement envelope, at a trajectory angle and velocity profile that the interdiction formations targeting algorithms had a documented response time of 7.3 seconds to recalculate, versus the 4-second acquisition window for standard emergence trajectories. Webb's description, delivered over the command channel to all 12 ships at the moment of execution, was hard right on emergence. Engines full, shoot the first thing you see. Both descriptions were accurate. The 12 ships came out of jump, not where the Keth blockade was pointed, but inside it, behind the inner ring of interdiction ships, at a combined velocity that put them through the formation before the targeting solutions could finish recalculating. The 4-second window that had destroyed every attempt to break the blockade for 3 weeks was gone, because the window assumed you were approaching from outside. They were already inside. 3 ships took catastrophic damage in the first 30 seconds. The Resolute Patience lost its drive section and went dark, but its crew sealed to emergency compartments and it did not break up. The 8,000 miles from home, named like all of the 3rd Squadron's ships by a crew with opinions about distance, took a direct hit to its bridge, but the XO had been standing watch and got the evacuation order out before the command deck depressurized. The persistent argument lived up to its name and survived with a hull breach in its cargo section and an engine coupling issue that was now, the chief engineer reported with great precision, definitely catastrophic. 9 ships kept moving. The Keth interdiction formation, built to destroy ships coming in from outside, was not built for an engagement inside its own perimeter. Its ships were positioned outward. Its fields of fire were calibrated outward. Webb's ships were behind the guns between the interdiction ships and the planet, in a geometry the Keth fleet commander had not modeled because no one had ever done it. There was a moment, 3 seconds, maybe 4, where nothing happened. Webb had predicted that moment, not in the calculations, which did not have a column for it, in the part of himself that had been in enough fights to know that even the most efficient enemy needs a moment to process something it has never seen before. He used the moment. All ships, he said, very calmly, full burn for the planet. Don't stop for anything. They burned. 2 Keth interdiction ships repositioned and opened fire. One of Webb's ships took a hit that sheared off its port weapons array, but kept its drive and kept moving. Another took a grazing shot that scrambled its navigation, and its pilot flew it manually from that point forward, which the pilot later described as a learning experience. The other Keth ships had not repositioned. Could not, fast enough. They had been built to be a wall. The wall had been put in the wrong direction. Webb's 9 functional ships, 8.5, if you counted the 1 flying manual, screamed toward Valefor at a speed that the manufacturer had also addressed in the warning documentation. He got on the command channel. Vela Prime Defense Command, this is Colonel Marcus Webb, Earth Expeditionary Force. We are inbound to your position. ETA 40 minutes. Get your heads down. He paused. We're a little late. We apologize for that. The comms unit in Syra Vel's hand went off at 0411. She was on the eastern wall. She had been on the eastern wall for 6 hours because that was where the Keth were most likely to probe if they decided the wait had run its course. She was running, in her head, the calculation she ran every hour now. Ammunition, fighters, fortification strength, energy. The number that came out of the calculation kept getting smaller. She kept not looking at the number, looking instead at the wall in front of her, at the position of her people, at the things she could change in the next hour. Just the next hour. She almost didn't answer the comms. She answered it. The voice on the other end was male, unhurried, with an accent she placed after a moment as Earth English, one of the mid-continent dialects, the ones that had a particular way of treating important statements like they were obvious things that barely needed saying. Vela Prime Defense Command, this is Colonel Marcus Webb. She sat down on the wall. Not because she was tired. She was past tired. She had been past tired for days. She sat down because her legs decided, independently of her, that this was a moment that required sitting. Commander? You there? She found her voice somewhere south of her ribcage. I'm here. 40 minutes out. We're going to need a landing zone. Something clear, central. No Keth armor within 200 meters if you can manage it. The parliamentary courtyard, she said. Her voice was doing something she did not have the bandwidth to examine. It's been clear since day 4. We've been using it for supply storage, but I can get that moved. Good. Can you hold 40 minutes? She looked at the eastern wall, at the fortifications, at the position of the Keth perimeter on the tactical display strapped to her wrist, at the ammunition count she had memorized that morning and updated 3 times since. We can hold 40 minutes, she said. Copy that. A pause. The sound of something in the background, Engines, alarms, people talking fast. Commander, I want you to know, we came as fast as we could. She thought about the math, about jump points and blockades and the distances involved. She thought about what it meant to come as fast as you could and still be 11 days into a war that was supposed to be over before you arrived. I know, she said. She stood up. Webb, still here. These are my people, she said. Not a warning, just information. The same way she said everything now. Flat and precise and true. All of them. 41,000 in the shelters and 900 on the walls and the ones we've already lost. All of them are mine. You understand that. A beat of silence. Understood, he said. Something in the way he said it made her believe him. Not the word. The weight he put under it. The way someone says understood when they're not just acknowledging a sentence, but absorbing a responsibility. She got off the wall. She got on the internal comms. She started giving orders. 40 minutes. 40 minutes was not long. 40 minutes was also the longest thing she had ever been asked to do. She did it. The Keth perimeter registered the inbound ships at 0418. The ground commander ran a new calculation. The calculation produced a result the ground commander had not previously encountered. Insufficient ground-based countermeasure capacity to interdict the inbound force before atmospheric entry. The ships were moving too fast and on a trajectory that the ground-based systems were not positioned to address. The ground commander sent a priority communication to the fleet commander. The fleet commander was occupied. The ground commander ran the next calculation. Assault on the parliamentary district before inbound force achieved landing. The result, insufficient time. 42 minutes to breach the fortifications at current engagement parameters. 39 minutes to inbound landing. 3-minute deficit. 3 minutes. The ground commander was not built to be angry. Was not built to feel anything in the way that biologists would describe feeling. But something in the decision matrix that ran in the substrate beneath the calculation functions noted the 3-minute deficit and noted it again and flagged it as a variable of the type that did not appear in prior operations and for which no existing protocol was designed. The Keth ground commander ordered an immediate assault. It was 0419. 40 minutes had become 39. Inside the parliamentary district, every alarm went off at once. Syra Vell had been expecting it. She had 39 minutes of ammunition left. She had 39 minutes of fighters left. She got on the comms to Webb. They're moving early. How close? 36 minutes out. They'll be at my walls in 12. The math ran itself. Then, we need 36 minutes, she said. Yes, he said. Can you go faster? A pause. The sound of someone asking a question that had already been answered once by physics and was being asked again anyway. Working on it, he said. She closed the comms. She looked at her people. 12 minutes, she said, on the open channel, so everyone could hear. Hold them for 12 minutes, and then make it 12 more, and then 12 more after that. That's all. Don't count past 12. The Keth hit the southern wall first. She ran south. The last 39 minutes began. The southern wall held for 14 minutes. It held 14 minutes because a woman named Corporal Eniatos had positioned herself at a juncture in the barricade where the Keth mechanized advance was funneling. Not through any tactical genius. Not because she had been assigned there, but because she had been carrying a crate of equipment to a different position and had been at that junction when the assault began and had simply never left. She held the junction with a weapon that was technically out of ammunition after the first 6 minutes, by which point she had begun throwing pieces of the barricade itself at the advancing units, which was not effective but was deeply confusing to the Keth mechanized drones, which were calibrated to respond to projectiles of certain mass and velocity profiles and had never been designed to respond to concrete and rebar thrown by hand. 6 fighters saw her and came to hold the junction with her. Then, 8 more. 14 minutes. When the junction finally fell, she was pulled back by 2 fighters who had to physically pick her up and carry her because she was still throwing things and apparently felt this could continue indefinitely. Syra heard about Corporal Toss over the command channel and wrote nothing, said nothing, cataloged the information in the part of her brain that was collecting everything, every act, every name, every moment of impossible stubbornness for a reckoning she did not allow herself to believe in and could not stop believing in. The southern wall fell. The Keth were inside the outer perimeter. She fell back to the secondary line. Webb, she said on the command channel, running. Status, 21 minutes. 21 minutes, and the Keth were inside the wire. She did the arithmetic the way she had been doing arithmetic for 2 weeks, which was not so much calculating as selecting. What can I spend, and what do I need to save, which position is worth defending, and which position can be traded for time. The inner district had 3 concentric defensible rings before the parliamentary building itself, which was where the shelters accessed, which was the thing that could not be traded. She had already decided to give up the first 2 rings. She was going to defend the third with everything she had left. Pull back to the inner ring, she ordered. Everyone, now. The retreat was not elegant. Retreats never are, and anyone who writes about retreats and describes them as organized is describing a thing they have never seen. What she oversaw was a controlled hemorrhage, an army pulling backward while still bleeding in 3 directions, carrying wounded, covering each other's movement in the specific way that looks from the outside like chaos, but is actually a negotiation, a constant series of small agreements between soldiers who had been fighting beside each other long enough to know each other's breathing, each other's reload time, which direction each person checked first. They made the inner ring. 612 of them. Syra counted twice. She had started with 894. She did not look at the number longer than 3 seconds. The inner ring was a fortified perimeter built around the parliamentary building itself, 3 meters of reinforced stone and prefabricated barrier backed by the building's own structural walls. In better days, it had been the security perimeter for heads of state, built to stop assassins and rioters and the general ambient level of political inconvenience that attended any functioning government building. It had never been built to stop an army. She made it stop an army anyway. The technique was simple and brutal. Concentrate everything you have at the choke points and don't let the choke points expand. The Keth could not flank a position that had no flanks, and the inner ring geometry meant they could only approach from 4 directions. She put her best fighters at those 4 approaches and told them the same thing she had told everyone. 12 minutes. Count 12 minutes. Then 12 more. The Keth hit all 4 approaches at once. She had expected that. She had positioned accordingly. What she had not expected, what nobody had expected, because the Keth had never done it before, because the Keth did not modify their approach mid-operation, because their entire tactical philosophy was built on the certainty that a superior planned approach executed with precision would always outperform improvisation, was what happened at the northwest approach at the 11-minute mark. The Keth at the northwest approach stopped. Not withdrew, not regrouped. Stopped, as in their advance halted, and their units held position and did not advance and did not retreat, and for approximately 90 seconds did absolutely nothing, while Syra's fighters at the northwest barricade stared at them with the particular expression of people who have run out of the psychological space to be confused by anything, but are discovering they were wrong about that. Then, the northwest Keth units began moving laterally, parallel to the perimeter, not toward it, moving in a pattern that took Syra 4 seconds to recognize. They were making room. "What are they doing?" said the fighter beside her. Not as a question. "I don't know," she said, which was true and also the most frightening thing she had said in 2 weeks. Webb saw it from above. The Adamant, his command ship, had entered the atmosphere 40 seconds earlier than the trajectory plan called for, because the chief engineer had found, under conditions of extreme professional duress, an additional 3% thrust the engines had been withholding for reasons she described as the manufacturer being cowardly. 40 seconds was not enough to change the timeline meaningfully, but it was enough to get optical sensors on the city of Vela Prime in time to see the Keth doing something in the northwest sector that made Webb lean forward his command chair and say, quietly, the word that served him as both oath and analysis. The Keth units at the northwest approach were not making room for a new assault wave. They were making room for something that had been called down from orbit. A Keth orbital support vehicle. Not a weapon in the usual sense, not a bombardment ship, but a precision delivery system for heavy mechanized units too large to navigate urban terrain under their own power, was descending through the upper atmosphere, visible on the sensors as a heat signature the size of a building. If it landed, it would deliver units that the inner ring could not stop. Not with what Syra's people had left. Not with anything. It was going to land in 4 minutes. Webb was 12 minutes out. "All ships," he said, "I need options for a kinetic intercept on an orbital vehicle currently at." He read the coordinates from the display, that altitude, that velocity, moving to those coordinates. "Talk to me." The options came back fast because this was the kind of ship and the kind of crew that had options ready for things they had not anticipated, because Webb's way of running a ship involved a standing expectation that the unexpected was always one conversation away, and they should all be having it in advance. The options were not good. A kinetic intercept at that range, with the vehicles Webb ships were carrying, required a firing solution that would put the debris field over the city. Too much collateral. An energy weapon intercept required a ship to move into a firing angle that would take 8 minutes minimum. A direct physical intercept, ramming, essentially or close enough that the distinction was academic, required a ship that could get there in 4 minutes. His ships were 12 minutes out, except for one. The persistent argument was not 12 minutes out. The persistent argument, due to its ongoing and now definitively catastrophic engine coupling issue, had been decelerating for the past 20 minutes in a way that had pulled it ahead of the formation rather than falling behind it. Because the engine failure was of the specific type that added thrust rather than removing it when it began to fail, which the chief engineer had admitted was a new one even for her. The persistent argument was 4 minutes out. At its current, uncontrolled, definitely catastrophic velocity, it was also in a trajectory that would take it through the Keth orbital vehicle's descent path if someone adjusted that trajectory by 6 degrees. Webb got on a private channel. Persistent argument actual, this is Webb. The captain of the persistent argument, a woman named Reyes who had been commanding the ship for 3 years and had named it herself and had once, when asked why, said that everything worth doing is an argument that never ends, came on the line sounding exactly as calm as someone who had been told her ship was going to explode at some point in the next 20 minutes and had decided to treat that as context rather than crisis. Webb, she said, I need you to adjust trajectory 6 degrees north by northeast. A pause. That takes me through the Keth descent vehicle. Yes. Another pause. What's my crew status on evacuation? You have time. 6 minutes minimum to impact. Pods jettison in 90 seconds. What's the debris field look like? He checked. Clear of the city. It'll come down in the eastern industrial zone. Nothing there. Keth personnel on the descent vehicle? Unknown. Understood. She did not pause this time. Adjusting trajectory. Give my crew a pickup, Webb. Already tasked. And Webb. Yeah. Don't let her get scrapped. I want her back when this is over. A beat. She's going to be fine. She just needs some work. He did not tell Reyes what he thought about the structural integrity of a ship that had rammed a Keth orbital vehicle at its current velocity. Copy that, he said. Persistent argument actual. You are authorized for full manual. You have the ship. I always had the ship, said Captain Reyes. The evacuation pods jettisoned. The persistent argument adjusted 6 degrees. Cyrus saw the sky change. The Keth orbital vehicle had been a heat signature, barely visible in the pre-dawn murk, a thing descending with the slow certainty of something that could not be stopped. And then there was a second heat signature, moving faster, moving wrong, moving in a way that nothing that large should be moving, and then the two signatures merged into a single event that the atmosphere had to think about for a moment before deciding how to react. The reaction was significant. A shock wave crossed the city, not destructive at the inner ring's distance, but present enough to feel a pressure in the chest and the ears and the feelings of anyone who had them, and then a light in the sky that was not fire exactly, but was the cousin of fire, the thing fire becomes when it has that much material to work with and that much altitude to fall from. The debris came down in the east. The northwest approach was still clear. The Keth units that had been making room for something that was no longer coming stood at the inner ring's perimeter for 7 seconds. 7 seconds was a long time for an organization built on computation. They had just watched an improvisation beat a plan. They had no protocol for that. Webb, said Syra, on the command channel, her voice doing that thing again that she did not have the bandwidth to examine. 5 minutes out, he said. Hold 5 minutes. What was that? A pause. That was a ship named the Persistent Argument, he said. Her crew is going to need pickup. Can you mark that landing zone? She marked it. 5 minutes, she said. 5 minutes, he said. She turned to face the northwest approach. 5 minutes, she told her 600. They held their positions. Every single one of them. The ones who were bleeding, and the ones who were out of ammunition, and the ones who were running on something that wasn't adrenaline anymore, because adrenaline had a shelf life, and they had exceeded it by days. They held because the alternative was a number, 9,800, that none of them had looked at directly, and all of them had been holding up for 2 weeks. The sky began to thunder. Not Keth. Not atmosphere. Ships. 8 ships entered the atmosphere at a descent angle that the flight manual for each of them specifically recommended against because they were already in the habit of ignoring specific recommendations, and they came down hard and fast and loud into the parliamentary courtyard and the open ground around it, And before the landing struts had even finished settling, the bay doors were open, and Earth's warriors were in the air. They descended from the sky the way everything the humans did descended. Too fast, too loud, with no apparent concern for the odds, and with a specific contained, utterly calm ferocity that the Keth targeting system spent 2.3 seconds to try to classify before defaulting to a category they had never used before. Unquantified threat. The Keth had a protocol for every category of threat they had ever encountered. They did not have one for this. The warriors hit the ground, and the ground changed. The Keth had a word for what happened next. It was not a word in any language a human had ever spoken, and it translated imperfectly into every language that tried. The closest any translator had ever gotten was a Valorian linguist named Asa, who spent 6 months after the battle studying captured Keth communication logs and produced a translation that she herself said was inadequate and then submitted anyway because the inadequacy was itself informative. The word, as nearly as she could render it, meant the failure of a prediction that was not supposed to be capable of failure. The Keth used this word exactly once in all of the communication logs from the Battle of Valor Prime. They used it at 0441, approximately 4 minutes after the first human soldiers reached the ground. Prior to that point, across 11 days of ground operation, across every engagement with the Valorian defenders, across every calculation they had run, and every variable they had processed, the Keth had not used the word at all. They had not needed it. Sergeant First Class Dominic Hale hit the ground at a run and did not stop running. This was not unusual for him. Hale operated at one speed in a combat environment, forward. His squad had given him a nickname. Because of it, not a flattering one, not the kind of nickname you put on a memorial, just the one that described accurately what he was like to work with in an environment where people were shooting at you. They called him the Weather, because he just kept moving regardless. He had 220 soldiers behind him. Behind them, the other 7 ships were still disgorging, still pouring people into the courtyard and the streets around it, still making the kind of noise that changes the acoustic character of a battle, that makes the soldiers who've been fighting alone for 11 days stop for a half second and feel something move through their chest that they will not be able to name for years. He identified the inner ring's defensive perimeter in his first 30 seconds on the ground and linked his tactical display with the Valorian command channel. A voice came through, flat, precise, controlled in the specific way of someone who has controlled themselves past the point where it should be possible. Earth Force, this is Commander Vel. Keth have 4 active engagement points at the inner perimeter. Northwest and south have been heaviest. We are holding, but we've got the northwest, Hale said, still running. Route me a path. The path appeared on his display. He went. What happened at the northwest approach in the next 6 minutes was the kind of thing that ends up in tactical training materials for the wrong reasons. It ends up there because a training officer looks at it and says, this is what not to do. This is a textbook violation of approach doctrine, fire discipline, positional geometry. The humans did not maintain cover. They did not advance in alternating bounded movements. They went directly at a fortified position at speed, which in the training materials is marked as a guaranteed way to sustain casualties. They sustained casualties. They also moved so fast and hit so hard and from so many angles simultaneously that the Keth units at the northwest approach, which had been running a calculation about the optimal way to breach the inner ring, had to run a different calculation, and then a third calculation, and then a calculation about the previous calculations. And somewhere in that cascade, the northwest approach stopped being a tactical problem the Keth were solving and became a tactical problem the Keth were managing, which was different, which was worse, which was, for an organization that had never had to manage a problem in 200 years of warfare, something close to the thing humans called panic, translated through a substrate that did not experience panic into a functional equivalent that produced the same results. The northwest approach held. That it did more than hold. Webb landed in the parliamentary courtyard at 0447 and met Commander Vel in the first 30 seconds by the simple method of walking toward the person who was clearly in charge, which was not hard to identify, because she was the one people were looking at when they needed to know what to do next. She was smaller than he'd expected. He didn't know why he'd expected anything. She was standing in front of the parliamentary building with a tablet in one hand, and a weapon in the other, and a bandage on her left hand that was a color he had seen before on things that had been through a great deal, and she was giving orders on 3 channels simultaneously and tracking the tactical display on her wrist, and she looked at him when he approached with the specific look of someone who is doing 15 things and can add one more. Webb, she said. Vel, he said. She looked at him for 2 seconds. He had the impression she was filing him away somewhere, not categorizing him, not assessing in the way you assess an asset, but the other thing, the thing that happens when you have been responsible for people for a long time, and someone new enters the radius of that responsibility, and you have to decide in very little time what kind of person they are. He stood still and let her look. Northwest approach, she said. Held. Hales pushing them back toward the outer perimeter. South. Second squad made contact 60 seconds ago. They've got it. East and north. Mopping up. The Keth started pulling units back about 4 minutes ago. Their ground commander is running calculations we disrupted. She nodded. Not relieved. Not grateful in any visible way. Just noting it, the way she noted everything into whatever internal ledger she was keeping. The shelters, she said. Safe. Still sealed. I haven't told them yet. He understood that. You didn't open a shelter until the ground was clear. You didn't tell people in shelters that it was over until it was actually over, because the particular horror of telling people it's over and then having it not be over was a thing that could not be undone. How long until it's clear? She asked. He checked his display, listened to the channels, did the math, but not the old math, not the math of insufficient resources and closing windows. The new math. 15 minutes. 20 to be safe. Long enough that the ground commander of the Keth was going to reach a threshold calculation. The point where continuing the operation cost more than withdrawing. The Keth had reached that point only twice before in 200 years of warfare, and had withdrawn both times because they were not built on stubbornness or pride, only efficiency. 20 minutes, he said. Maybe less. She said nothing for a moment. Then, she said, my people have been up for 6 days. Most of them. Some of them more. My people can hold it. Tell your people to rest. She looked at him again. That's not something I can actually make them do, she said. He looked past her at the fighters visible from where they stood. The ones at the building's entrance, the ones running ammunition to the inner ring, the ones who were bleeding and moving anyway. He understood what she meant. These were not soldiers who would be ordered to rest while the ground was still being fought over. They would hold their positions until someone physically removed them. Then, let them hold, he said, but get eyes on them. Anybody who's about to fall down, I want them sat down before they do. She nodded. She got on the internal channel. She started giving orders. He turned and went back to managing a battle that had, in the last 20 minutes, shifted from a problem of insufficient force to a problem of coordination, which was a better problem to have, which was in fact the only problem he had ever been interested in having. The Keth ground commander reached the threshold calculation at 0511. The calculation was of a type it had run before twice in operations the records listed under designations that translated loosely as withdrawal condition met. The calculation took into account remaining unit capacity, projected engagement outcomes, resupply timeline, the behavior, and capacity of the force now operating against them. It had never run this calculation with a number like the one currently in the variable for opposing force behavior. The Keth taxonomy of enemy behavior had categories: predictable, semi-predictable, variable, and a fourth category that had been added specifically because of the records from other species who had fought humans, a category that translated in the same imprecise way all these translations were imprecise, as inconsistent in a manner that is not resolvable to pattern. Every unit in the category had a tactical note attached. The note said, withdrawal is cost-effective when this variable is present. The ground commander sent the order. The Keth pulled back. Not a rout. Not a retreat in the human sense of a thing that breaks and runs. They moved in their precise, organized way, backward along calculated withdrawal routes, carrying their wounded in the efficient way they always did, maintaining defensive perimeter integrity, following an algorithm that had been designed in advance for exactly this outcome, and was therefore not a failure so much as an alternate branch of decision tree. But they moved. They moved away from Valor Prime. The gun stopped. The silence was strange. Cyrus stood at the inner ring's northern barricade and listened to the silence and did not immediately believe it. 11 days of noise had done something to her, had built an architecture in her auditory processing that expected percussion at regular intervals, that kept waiting for the next detonation even after the detonations had stopped. She stood and listened to the silence and counted. 30 seconds. 60. 90. Commander. Darrow's voice on the channel. Keth units have cleared the outer perimeter. Hale's team is reporting no contact. She said nothing. Commander. Copy, she said. She looked at the board, at all the crossed-out sectors. At the center, still unmarked. Still there. She thought about opening the shelters. She thought about 9,800 children who had been in the underground dark for 11 days, who had stopped asking when someone was coming. Someone had come. She told herself she would feel something about that later. Not now. Now there was still too much to manage, too many wounded, too much coordination with Webb's people, too much of the immediate aftermath of a thing that was not, even now, over in any real sense. The Keth had withdrawn, not surrendered, and the difference between those two things was enormous and wouldn't matter for years. There was too much to feel anything about anything specific yet. She felt it anyway. She felt it as a tightening in the throat, and then a loosening, and she breathed through it and kept standing because she was the commander and she had to keep standing, and then she breathed through it again and again until it settled into a place she could carry without it showing. She got on the channel to the shelters. The person who answered was a shelter administrator named Pell, who had been coordinating the underground population since day 3, and who sounded, when he came on the line, exactly like a man who has been holding something very heavy for a long time and is not yet sure whether to set it down. Administrator Pell, this is Commander Vell. Commander. His voice was doing a thing. She recognized the thing. I want you to open the shelters, she said. Tell the people inside that the Keth have withdrawn from the city. Tell them that Earth Expeditionary Force is on the ground, and the parliamentary district is secure. A silence. Commander. Is it? He stopped. Started again. Is it really? Open the shelters, Pell. The first person out of the Easter shelter was a child. This was not coordinated or symbolic or planned. The administrators had opened the shelter doors and told the people inside what the commander had said, and in the general motion of thousands of people beginning to move toward light and air after 11 days of underground dark, a child simply moved faster than the adults, the way children do, and came out first. She was 7 years old by the afterward accounting. Her name was Nara, which nobody knew yet. At the moment she stepped out of the shelter and into the pre-dawn light of Valor Prime and looked up at a sky that had been on fire the last time she had seen it. The sky was not on fire. It was the color that comes before dawn. Not dark, not light. The in-between color. Nara looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at the parliamentary courtyard, at the ships landed there, at the soldiers moving around them, at the Valorian fighters holding their positions or sitting against walls in the particular way of people who have been standing for too long and had just been told they can stop. She walked up to the nearest soldier. The soldier was Corporal Enia Toss, who was sitting against the Parliament building's east wall with her hands at her lap, and her weapon beside her, and a look on her face that was not quite any emotion, and not quite the absence of it. Toss had thrown concrete at a mechanized army. Toss had been carried out of a position because she had refused to leave it. Toss was at this moment looking at the middle distance and breathing. Nara stood in front of her. Toss looked down. Nara said nothing. She sat down next to Toss against the wall and looked at the same middle distance. They sat like that for a while. After a few minutes, more children came out of the shelter, and more adults behind them, and the courtyard began to fill with the slow, disbelieving movement of people who have survived something they were not sure they would survive, and are taking the world in one piece at a time. People sat down on the ground. People stood and looked at the sky. People found each other and held on. Webb watched from the courtyard's edge. He had seen this before. The aftermath. The specific texture of it. He had been on enough planets, in enough conflicts, to know what it looked like when people who had been at the absolute edge of what was survivable stepped back from that edge. It looked like this. He went to find Vel. She was at the board. Still at the board, in the command post that was still technically the triage center and weapons depot and kitchen. She was adding something to the board, not crossing anything out, writing in the open space at the bottom, in the same marker she had used for everything else. He looked at what she was writing. A date. Today's date. And a number. 2216. The ones we lost, she said, without turning around. He stood behind her and said nothing. I'll write the names later, she said. There's a list. Darrow kept it. She paused. I should have kept it. You were busy keeping the rest of them alive, he said. She turned. She looked at him. She looked past him at the courtyard visible through the command post's open door, at the people in it, at the children sitting next to soldiers. It was 9 days, she said. For 11 days I told myself it was a number, and I shouldn't look at it, and I should just do the next hour. And there was 9 days. And you got here 3 days late, he said. You weren't late, she said. You were exactly when you were going to be. He thought about the warning documentation, the engine coupling, the persistent argument, and Captain Reyes, whose crew he had recovered from their pods 20 minutes ago, and who had looked at the debris field in the Eastern Industrial Zone with an expression he could not fully read. He thought about 6 days of moving as fast as physics and stubbornness together could manage. The compact is going to have a lot to say about the unauthorized nature of this operation, he said. I know. There will be hearings. There usually are. I'll probably have to answer some questions about breaking several treaties related to the use of military force in restricted systems. She said nothing for a moment. Were they good questions? He almost smiled. Almost. Probably not. Then, give them good answers anyway, she said. That's what I do. He looked at the board, at all the crossed-out sectors, at the ones that weren't crossed out. I want to say something, he said. Then say it. What you did here, with what you had, against what they sent. He stopped. Started again. There are going to be people in rooms with whiteboards who tell you this was not survivable, that you were statistically, that the numbers, he stopped again. The 14 planets that went before this one, none of them had someone like you. I want you to know I believe that. I'm not. You don't need to, she said. I know. I'm going to anyway. She looked at him. The 9,800, she said. What about them? They're going to grow up, she said. That's what I keep thinking about. They're going to grow up, and they're going to not know what it felt like in here. And that's correct. That's what's supposed to happen. But I want, she stopped. Looked at the board. I wanted to know someone was up here. That nobody left. They'll know, he said. Will they? He thought about 14 planets. About the survivors who all said the same thing. We waited, and no one came. He thought about what it would mean to those 14 sets of survivors to know that there was a 15 that ended differently. That the math got overruled. They'll know, he said. Because you're going to tell them. She was quiet for a moment. I'm not good at that, she said. Talking about things. I noticed. He paused. You're good at doing things. The talking part you can learn. She turned back to the board. She wrote, under the number, under the date, in letters that were not precise the way the rest of her writing was precise, that were a little larger and a little unsteady. They held 2 words. She stood back and looked at them. Then she put the marker down and walked out into the courtyard, into the pre-dawn light, into the slow movement of people who had survived something together and were now doing the earliest and most difficult work of figuring out what came next. Web watcher go. He looked at the board, at the 2 words at the bottom. He took out his own marker. He didn't know where it came from, one of those things that appears when you need it, and wrote underneath in smaller letters, the kind you put in a margin when you want to say something that doesn't fit the main column. We came as fast as we could. Asterisk, he put the cap back on. He walked out after her. Outside, the in-between color was starting to give way. The sun, Valar IV's sun, a yellow-white star that didn't look any different from 1,000 other suns in 1,000 other systems, but that these particular people had been fighting under for 11 days and would spend the rest of their lives recognizing that sun was coming up. It cleared the horizon. The courtyard filled with light. Nara, still sitting beside Corporal Toss, turned her face toward it. Toss did the same. Somewhere in the Eastern Industrial Zone, in a debris field that contained the scattered pieces of a ship named the Persistent Argument, a recovery drone began its work. Captain Reyes would be told later that the ship was unsalvageable. She would contest this assessment. She would continue to contest it for 4 years through 3 separate compact engineering reviews until someone with enough authority to resolve the argument finally sat down with the structural reports and the cost projections and said, in the way of people who were conceding a point they never wanted to concede, that given certain unconventional repair approaches and a budget that was technically possible, if not technically recommended, the ship could in fact be restored. She named the restored ship the same thing. Of course she did. Some arguments never end. That is not a failure of the argument. That is what arguments that matter look like. Ongoing, unresolved, moving forward anyway. The sun finished rising over Valar Prime. The city burned in places it would burn for days. The work of aftermath, the long, undramatic, essential work of counting and rebuilding and recovering and grieving, which is the work that comes after the thing everyone remembers and takes 10 times as long, had not yet started and would take years. But the city was still there. The people in it were still there. Someone had come. The math had been wrong. And far above, in the edge of the atmosphere where the sky goes from blue to black, the remaining ships of Earth's expeditionary force held their orbit, watching over a planet that had been told no one was coming, that had fought as though they were the last ones left, that had held until holding was no longer the thing that was needed. They held. Rescue descended from the sky. The numbers never saw it coming. They never do.